Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon. I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to vlog 150. Doubling the doctorate. Why do a second PhD? So firstly, we need to celebrate vlog 150. Isn't that extraordinary? Isn't that remarkable? If you told me when I started this, the first vlog was recorded in my lounge room in Bathurst in New South Wales, if you told me we would be here at vlog 150, I would have thought you were crazy. So I really want to thank every single one of you, all our wonderful friends and colleagues and students in regional Australia. You are the reason why I started this vlog series in the first place, just so I could say hi to all our wonderful students in Alice Springs and in Katherine and in Tennant Creek and throughout all the regional cities and towns of South Australia. You are the reason we are here. But we've gathered friends and colleagues and comrades around the world, and I'm incredibly grateful for the support and the compassion and the care that you have shown, the interest you have shown. And on behalf not only of me, but of the entire Office of Graduate Research, all our remarkable staff, thank you so much for being with us, your suggestions and your intellectual generosity. You represent the best of what universities can be. You also represent the best of what a fantastically engaged community can be. So thank you. Now, it appears we've developed like another trend. We've got the Christmas vlog, we've got the New Year's Eve vlog, but also about every 50, so 50, 100, 150, we do something meta. We reflect on the nature of the doctorate. So I think that's a great trend that we will continue. And 150 is no exception. We got this fantastic request from Nick. Hi, Nick. Nick wanted me to talk through the reasons and the rationales for doing a second doctorate. Now, I know there are people out there with the whole expression, oh, I'm going to do a second PhD, or even thinking about a second PhD. I can hear you shrieking from Southern California. I can feel you rocking gently from side to side. I can hear sort of people getting a knife and trying to self-harm. A lot of stuff is going on because you're saying, look, doing the first doctorate is hard enough. Why would anybody think of doing a second one? And I certainly understand that intent and that intentionality, but there are fantastic reasons to do a second doctorate. And the literature is interesting, as always, with all the suggestions you give me to go out into the world and find some literature on it. The popular literature is interesting, the blogs are interesting, and there is some academic literature. So we're going to talk about all of that today. So why are we doing this? Well, firstly, this does seem unusual to me. So in some ways, I agree with all the shrieking students out there around the world. And look, I love learning. I respect people's choices. And I think lifelong learning is one of the greatest commitments we can make in life. Okay, so that's where I start. But the second doctorate is like climbing Mount Everest for a second time. So it's like saying to someone, oh look, I've climbed Mount Everest for the second time. And you sort of go, oh look, right, second time? That's great. While you're thinking, why would you do it a second time, bro? You've shown you can do it. Why would you go a second time and take all those risks to just say, I've done it twice? And so I understand that sort of doctorate argument too. You've done it. You've demonstrated the research training. You've demonstrated an original contribution to knowledge. What are you thinking, girlfriend? But there are legitimate reasons. And so this vlog is important. I'm going to talk through the 5 reasons you do a second doctorate, but also for the people considering it. In a couple of those 5 examples, I show you a quicker way to get where you need to be. So I hope that is useful. And also, can I say, this is increasingly a thing. I always try and be ahead or prescient in these vlogs, and this is increasingly a thing. So 40% of our PhD students, you, will end up working in a university, and you will be a supervisor. And supervising the second PhD is becoming an important area to consider, and it is a different type of supervision. I've done a few. I'll continue, I think, to do a lot more in the next decade. So for those of you out there as PhD students, even if you choose not to do a second doctorate, you will be supervising them. And there are particular and different types of doctorates. The doctorate really changes when you do it the second time around. It's like getting married for the second time. It's a different kind of marriage. It's not better or greater or worse than the first one, but it is different because you've learnt the lessons. So let's talk about the second doctorate. And as I said, I have this profound commitment to learning and continue to learn. And as some of you may know, look, I've committed to formal education pretty deeply. I have, let me take a breath and remember it myself, I have 3 bachelor degrees, I have 2 graduate diplomas, 3 master's degrees, but only 1 PhD. Okay, so I've committed to lifelong learning. But the other bit of this story that may be of interest to you is after I completed my PhD, and I graduated early in 1995, so a long, long time ago. So after I graduated from my PhD, I completed 2 further master's degrees, another bachelor degree, and both of my graduate diplomas. So why that's important is my PhD was and is my highest qualification, but it's not my last. And indeed, I did more qualifications after the PhD than I did before the PhD. Now, the reason why I did those qualifications, and can I say, not a second PhD ever, why I did those other qualifications is I wanted the coursework. I wanted a structured reading, learning, and writing environment. And the reason for that is I was moving into a lot of brand new disciplines, really interesting, edgy, interdisciplinary areas. So for me, these qualifications were a methodical pathway for me to move into new disciplines, and then once I had the mastery of those disciplines, build the interdisciplinary links with my already existing expertise. And I particularly wanted to have that guided journey so I wasn't sort of accidentally miss chunks of a paradigm or chunks of a trope. So I didn't want the free research time of another PhD. I already had that. I was an academic, I get up early, and I have research training. So, you know, my publications, my books were powering through at this point. I didn't need the free research time. I had that as an academic, and I was going independently through my career. So I wanted that structured learning. And wow, it did pay off. I did, in that set of qualifications after my PhD, a Bachelor of Education, a Graduate Diploma in Internet Studies specialising in online learning, and a Research Masters, a Masters of Education with honours and all the rest of it. And because I did that educational suite after my PhD, I went on to be, in one of my jobs that I've held, a Professor of Education and a Head of School of Education. Now, I would not have had that job, and it was a big job and a fabulous job, and I loved it. I wouldn't have had that job if I hadn't done those specialist education qualifications. Okay. Now, for the graduate diplomas were in Internet Studies and Gastronomic Tourism. Again, edgy, interdisciplinary areas right at the edge of knowledge. So I wanted to get in there early, quickly and fast. I wanted to learn quickly through all the structured coursework, do the reading, do the assignments, so I'm ahead of the game. And then just to use the example of gastronomic tourism, I work in regional development, particularly looking at small cities and large towns we call third-tier cities. And I was interested and profoundly interested in how food and wine tourism and indeed agriculture can be embedded into a regional development model. And that hadn't been done around the world. So I took that interdisciplinary new graduate diploma and did a really strong graft to regional development, and a lot of consultancies and work came from that graft. So you can see how I've used qualifications to create new knowledge and new ideas. So lifelong learning, magnificent. I'm a believer. Hello, hello, hello. But why would you do another doctorate? Why would you be a doctor? Or why would you be a doctor squared? Now, there are 5 reasons, so let's get into these reasons. And as I said, I'm going to present them and maybe the alternatives that are available to you. So reason 1, you're claiming expertise in an adjacent or attendant discipline, so something that's close, or indeed a completely different discipline. This is the most common reason that guys and gals decide to do a second doctorate. So as a worker, you need a PhD in an adjacent discipline to demonstrate your credibility. Now we'll go into this. Now this is very common in forensic science and criminology. We also see a lot of movement, obviously, from maths to physics and physics to maths. Big hi to all our physicists, big hi to all our mathematicians. You're very precious to me. You'll also see, we're back to maths again, we see our maths graduates going on to do a second doctorate in some area of computing. Okay, so you can see what's happening here. And the reason for it is credibility is required, particularly if you are offering expert, paid commentary in a court of law. And that's why forensic science is so incredibly important here. So I'll just give you an example. You're in a court of law and supposedly this has happened. So you're offering expert testimony in a court of law, and the one of the lawyers says to you, so, okay, you're offering this expert testimony, what's your PhD in? And you say, it's in biology. To which, of course, this fabulous lawyer says, well, you haven't got a PhD in forensic science, we'll discredit your commentary. So therefore, if you do a PhD, a second one in forensic science, you can demonstrate credibility in those types of fora. So basically, if you need to show, not that because you can hold the expertise, but you need to confirm it with credibility, the second doctorate absolutely is a way to do it. And that's the most common reason people do. Now, great. But can I say to all the men and women out there who are in this position, and you're thinking, right, well, I'm going to have to do a second doctorate. Okay, let me show you an easier way to do this. There is a faster way to do this. So if you see your business shifting, if you say, this is my expertise, but you know what, a lot of my work is coming in this area over here, and I need to prove my credibility. That won't happen overnight, but if you see it happening, start to publish in this adjacent area. You should be anyway. If you are an expert, you should be confirming it anyway. But start to publish in this area. Particularly, start to cluster those publications, and you're aiming for about 8 if you can, 8 publications in a particular paradigm there. Cluster them to start to create an argument. Because what I'm suggesting is you enroll in a PPP, a PhD by prior publication. We've done a whole vlog on this, and I know that's been incredibly useful. Can I say our enrolments in the PPP at Flinders University have gone like this on a graph since I did that vlog. So a lot of people are going, this is a thing I can do, let's do this. So if you want this second PhD, do it via PPP, because you already have the research training. You don't need all the stuff that exists around a first doctorate. You know what you're doing. So therefore, cluster those 8 publications, enroll. You enroll for 6 months, you write that big intro or contextualising statement, integrating statement it's sometimes called, of about 10,000 words, sent to examiners, thanks for playing, you have your second PhD. So remember, you already have all the expertise you require from a PhD, so use it and do a PhD by prior publication in 6 months. That's your second doctorate. 2, higher doctorate. Higher doctorate. Now again, this is the second most common second doctorate that exists in the world. Now what happens is about 5 years, and it must be at least 5 years after your PhD is completed and graduated, you enroll in a higher doctorate. So what happens is your research is assessed in that period between after your PhD and when you enroll in your higher doctorate. It can be 5 years, has to be at least 5 years, but can be 20, can be 25, can be anything actually. It's assessing your contribution to the field. So it is lovely. The higher doctorate is the Doctor of Laws, Letters, Science and Theology, although there are some fantastic sort of outlier examples around the world, particularly in the UK. There is the fantastic higher doctorate, the Doctor of Technology. I love this. So Dr. Tech. Doesn't that sound like a Bond villain? Hello, Mr. Bond. I'm Dr. Tech. You're about to die. I mean, fantastic. So Dr. Tech. So that's tremendous. I just think that's just the best title you could ever be. I'm Dr. Tech. So there are all sorts of honorary higher doctorates. See, this is where it gets a bit confusing. See, the honorary higher doctorate we see a lot. You know those people, those great people that do the speeches at the graduations. So they've had this fantastic life, they've contributed to humanity, and they're invited to come to a graduation and do a speech. And you know how they often get a qualification during that? That's called an honorary higher doctorate. So they're rewarded for their contribution to society, right? Now that is different from an earned higher doctorate. That's what it's called, earned higher doctorate. So again, what does that look like? Well, 5 or more years after your PhD, you enroll in a higher doctorate. You again gather together all your publications that in this case, for many disciplines, includes entire books. So you bundle everything together, write that contextualizing statement at the start again, showing your contribution post the PhD. That takes again 3 to 6 months. Then that is sent out to examiners, they assess your contribution, and you return with a higher doctorate. Now this is, can I say, quite a lovely thing. I think the higher doctorate is a lovely thing. And a lot of institutions have contacted me to say, would I like to do a higher doctorate? And of all the second PhDs, look, at some point, I might do this. I think this is a lovely thing to do. It's a reflexive moment of your research career. So I understand why people do it, and you might consider it in 5 or 10 years or more. 3, professional development and or intrinsic motivation. Now this is the area of growth. It's small at the moment. This is an area of growth for the second doctorate. So we're seeing this particularly growing in our PhD students who are over 50 years of age. So what happens is they're like me, they receive their doctorate in a particular field in their early 20s, but then they're in a career. They're earning a great living, they're doing fine, and maybe, 50 to 60 to 65, they're moving into retirement and they enroll in a second PhD, perhaps part-time, to sort of move them into the transition from one area of work and life into their next stage. But they're doing it intrinsically, not necessarily to earn a living, but because it's something that interests them. So my favourite example of this is a wonderful man, a judge. He's now a retired judge, but a judge had done his doctorate in law, obviously Doctor of Juris, fantastic qualification. But this wonderful man had a lifelong interest in the Holocaust. So he then enrolled just as he was retiring from the bench, and of course he carried it through his retirement, but he enrolled in a history PhD, his second doctorate, and did it on the Holocaust. So isn't that fantastic? Intrinsic motivation. I am interested in doing this for me. So that's a fantastic area, and that will be increasing as a way of doing a second doctorate. 4, biggie. You're moving into an interdisciplinary field, right? So scholarship is changing, research is also changing, and most people who do a PhD undertake it in a traditional discipline. Particularly in Australia, I would argue it's a real problem of Australian higher education. It's very wedded or nested into traditional disciplines. So it is very narrow, and it's not the adventurous spirit I think we see in a lot of European countries, through a lot of the African nations, and also in North America. But look, there are some areas, nanotech, hi to all that nanotech crew, I adore you, neuroscience, cultural studies, regional development, internet studies, food studies, just to name a few, that are incredibly exciting and are employing a lot of graduates. Can I say these are big areas? So if you've got this new interesting field or idea that's outside of a traditional discipline, then enrolling in a second doctorate can be really prescient here, because you're enrolling not for the library or the archive or the lab, you're enrolling for the supervisor. If you find that person that's at the edge of knowledge and really doing exciting stuff, and you're with them at the start of building a new field, then that is a tremendous moment, right? So I would advise you all, if you found that person and they're happy to take you on, that's a great second doctorate, because together you will build a new field. Magnificent. Okay, last one. 5, completing a professional doctorate as your first doctorate, but then you do a traditional PhD. So again, this is the most common mode of a second doctorate in health and education in particular. So the Doctor of Education and or the Doctor of Public Health, or the modes of Prof Doc in health, there are many modes of that around the world. So you've completed that. That's the professional doctorate. And often that's done purely for career terms. Okay, so you do it to be a principal, you do it to be the head of a hospital, I get all of that. So the Prof Doc, in those two areas, you're just doing it to get on in your career. But once you've achieved that, it's very common that you've had that experience in health and education, and you've got something to say. And it might be about educational leadership, it might be about public health or duty of care or end-of-life care or well-being, those really big topics that you've got something to say that require a traditional doctorate rather than the scaffolded doctorate that we see with the Prof Doc. So they are the 5 most common reasons, rationales and ways of doing a second doctorate. And as you can see, every single one of those is actually legitimate. But of course, the reasons to not do a second doctorate are also very clear. I do have to be honest about that. 1 PhD demonstrates that you can do research, that you've had research training. You don't need to prove it again. And many of us, and I think this is an important truth as well, many of us, me included, work in incredibly diverse areas beyond the PhD. My PhD was on youth cultures, in fact post-youth cultures, in Thatcher's Britain. Now, I published very strongly from that thesis, but 99% of my research that I've published since that thesis has nothing to do with Margaret Thatcher or post-youth culture. Nothing. No connection at all. Okay. So for me though, I support people that do this, because how can we ever argue against lifelong learning? How can we ever argue against intrinsic motivation to learn and create and change and transform? It's breathtaking. Now, many of you also are going, this is just crazy. Remember, you're suffering through your first doctorate at the moment. But in 5 or 10 or 15 years or 20 years' time, a higher doctorate may really give you a great sense of satisfaction. So don't say, I'm never going to do one, because the higher doctorate at some point might really give you a sense of peace and completion and a sense of your accomplishments. So that could really be an option for you. So certainly today, thank you for joining me for vlog 150 on the Doctor, the Doctor Squared. But thank you so much for everything that every single one of you do in your support and your care for this vlog series, your care and support for me and the Office of Graduate Research. You are amazing. I wish you love, light and peace. Tea out.